This is episode number 19 of the Gruler Nation Podcast. My name is Robert Gruler. I'm joined today by Greg Matsen. Greg, thanks for being here.
No problem. Glad to be here.
So I'm really excited to talk to you. I know I've known you for a little bit, but as of recent, so first of all, let me back up, getting ahead of myself. You're a financial planner. You are somebody who is involved in your faith. You're somebody who's been married for, I think you just had your 30-year anniversary.
That's right.
You've got 4 kids. And you've had a lot of success, but more recently you've transitioned into starting your own show, your own podcast. It's called Cwic Media, and it's actually spelled in a way that I had not seen before. It's C-W-I-C. Can you tell me where does that word come from? You said it's an old English word?
Yeah, it's an old English word that basically it means living or alive. And for me, it was, once I decided to do this, I'd been knocking this around for a while, this idea, several years. My wife finally got on me to get this done. And actually, it has a lot to do with my health and just starting to get better health, feeling a lot better. That kind of brought me to that word that, this is because of the health that I have now, where it is improving quite a bit. I just thought, hey, I'm more alive right now, and so I'm going to be able to do this podcast now. So I went with Cwic.
Cwic, and that means more alive?
It means alive, yeah.
Alive.
To be alive or living, yeah.
Yeah, I have not seen that before. And
that was part of the idea, right?
I
want something unique. It's a little bit tougher when people are searching, or I tell someone it's Cwic Media.
Yeah, you got to spell it out.
But eventually my thought was, it's something that could catch on, and the uniqueness will overcome that.
Yeah, that's great. So tell me what is Cwic Media? So I know it's a podcast. I know it's a show that you have also on YouTube. So you've got your audio, you've got your show. Tell me a little bit more about what it focuses on.
So right now the focus is primarily on scripture study.
Yeah.
And so right now, for example, I'm doing a commentary on the New Testament. And so every week I put 2 episodes together on that. And just go over specific chapters within the New Testament. And then eventually we'll do one on the Old Testament and other books of Scripture. But I have over, 30 years now, more or less, done a lot of, it's been a hobby of mine, is to study ancient civilization, to study other languages, to study other religions. And so I have kind of a system that I've developed in how to look at Scripture, regardless of whether it could be, Hindu or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever it is. There's a lot. There's just kind of a system that I've come up with where after looking at books of Scripture and kind of understanding where the authors are coming from and some ancient philosophy, I'm able to kind of look at it in a different, unique perspective and maybe reveal some things that other people may not have seen, kind of between the lines.
Right. And how did you develop this system? I mean, I'm somebody, I went to Catholic school growing up. I've studied world religions. I've studied all of these things. When you're talking about that subject matter, there is a structure that's been in place for thousands of years to teach that. And then for somebody to come around and say, well, I've got my own system here. I've got these own pillars that I, look to or something. How did you come up with this? Where did it come about?
So some of it comes from my own faith, the LDS faith.
Sure.
I'm a part of that. But these actually are unique. And a lot of it comes from the study of ancient scripture and ancient religion. And what I mean by that is, if you read... I read a lot of books about these things, but more importantly, I actually read the actual stuff, So if I'm going back and looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls, I actually read the Dead Sea Scrolls and not just books about the Dead Sea Scrolls or Egyptian religion or going back to the Babylonians and the Canaanites and the Assyrians and all this other stuff, right? There's kind of this common mentality that, for example, the Bible comes out of. And even though as someone who is a Christian and a believer, I find the Bible unique in that way, but it's also a product of the people that wrote it, right? And the civilization and the time period that they were in. And so looking at those things, you can kind of start to get an idea, a little bit more of a broader view of perhaps what was meant and what to maybe take literally sometimes and maybe what not to take literally sometimes.
So can you give us an example? So walk us through kind of, are you talking about you pick a story from the New Testament and then run this through your sort of analytical process, or kind of give us, what are you doing on your show?
Well, so for example, let me give you an Old Testament example first.
Yeah.
It might be a little easier to, that everybody knows, and that would be the creation.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So you have, I'll listen sometimes to a podcast or somebody talk about someone who's kind of pretty strong Christian, and they're trying to go into down the avenue of creationism. And so they want to talk about intelligent design, and maybe to one extreme it would be someone who's saying, no, the earth was created in 6 or 7 days, right?
Sure.
And then on the other extreme you have someone who is a scientist, and they're talking about evolution, and someone who has a faith in God, or is a Christian. Sometimes it's kind of hard to find where you fit in there. What are your ideas on what this stuff means?
Right.
And so if I were to take ancient religion broadly and look at the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Canaanites, etc., you're going to find, in fact, worldwide, you're going to find similar creation stories with all of them. And they're not exact, but they're very similar. They have flood examples too, like with Noah as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so the first thing I would look at with that would be what I call the higher and lower law with that. And that is that most scriptural, from all civilizations, most scripture is focused on bringing the spiritual together with the carnal or the physical. And in fact, the very first lines of the first verse of Genesis 1:1 is, "And in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And see, I don't take that literally. I think what is being done there is you're laying down a principle that says this is what everything's about.
Right.
It's about bringing together the spiritual, the heavens, and bringing together the carnal or the physical. And if you look at other documents and from the Essenes or the Dead Sea Scrolls and others, they focus a lot on that. That's what those things are focused on. So if I have that in mind to begin with when I'm reading something like the creation story, then maybe I don't have to take everything exactly literal as to what's being stated there. And I can also look at a creation story that is based on Solomon's temple. And so, for example, Moses goes up to Sinai, he gets the law, right? He gets the tablets, the 10 Commandments, and he comes back down. And then they build a tabernacle after that. Well, that tabernacle, if you study that closely, you see that tabernacle is actually built around those 7 creation periods. From the Holy of Holies in the center, where the Ark of the Covenant sits, to the veil. That's day 1 and day 2. And you can actually follow through the temple or the tabernacle and see that this is built around this creation story. And so you start to get a different view of what your creation is about. It doesn't mean that, light didn't come into the darkness. Maybe all that did happen, but you're speaking in very symbolic terms.
Right. Yeah, and I can appreciate that. I think that sort of dichotomy that you just described is prevalent in a lot of areas of life. We studied that hard in law school. So you have people who will look back at the U.S. Constitution and they'll be strict constructionists who say every word there means exactly what it meant back in 1790, right?
Right.
And we have to follow that to the T. But then you have the other guys who say, well, let's kind of follow the spirit of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. They were kind of talking about all of these things, and so you can see that not just in religion but in a number of different ways. How do you approach that conversation with people, I guess, who you have a number of followers, mm-hmm. right? You have a lot of people who your podcast has basically exploded. I mean, you haven't been doing it for a long time.
Yes.
You have a lot of people, a lot of interest, a lot of followers. how are you having that conversation with them, or kind of defining where that should fall, where they should fall? More kind of strict constructionist, or is it a case by case basis? Is it based on the story that you're? I'm not being artful in my question, but do you understand kind of what?
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah,
Okay.
I know exactly what you're saying. I think that at least with my audience, where I have mostly a religious audience,
Sure.
they would lean more toward the strict constructionist.
Sure.
And so what I try to do is maybe find that medium between that and the spirit of things, right? And so, in other words, where my audience might be a little bit more conservative, I probably appeal to a little bit more educated, and those that probably would look at a little bit more of the spirit of something. And so what I try to do, and the slogan that I have for the podcast is culture and practical theology.
Okay.
And so I always try to look at something I try to look at things in a very practical sense. And for me, as someone who's always been a critical thinker, I need to know why, right? It's hard for me just to say I can do it. I can go off of what people might call blind faith for a while, right? But I need to know why, and I think that that's good. I think that's a good thing to do, and so the more I can get that out there, the more I think that's what is appealing to people, is they want to hear something that is not just what I call fluff.
Right.
They want to hear the meat and potatoes that are behind it. And so the more I can construct the time period, the customs and the traditions, and really the mentality, I think, of the time that they're writing, I think the more people can see, oh, this is maybe what they're trying to get at here, instead of trying to take something that's, because if you're setting yourself up, I think, for failure in your belief in God or in your religion, whatever that might be, if you go on pure blind faith.
Sure.
There's too much information out there today.
Right.
Right. There's too much that you're going to absorb that is just going to bring down that house of cards.
Well, and I think how you sort of described it at the beginning when we hopped on here, you were saying that there's a number of different stories from a number of different cultures, and there's certain principles that are sort of threaded throughout each of them, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, all of the ones that you listed. And you can still see a lot of that obviously in the number of different religions that we have throughout the world. There's a lot of similarities between a lot of the belief systems, and they follow certain principles. But when you do get to certain beliefs that are sort of in place without you being able to know exactly why, that can be very off-putting to a lot of people, especially some of the things that don't make sense to some people. I don't know a whole lot about LDS, and I'd love to talk to you more about that. But there are some things that Orthodox Christians do, or Orthodox Jews, separating the pork from this and that and the other, and you start kind of scratching your head. So if my meat touches the potatoes, and I use that fork, I'm going to hell over this thing.
Right.
I'm not saved by our Lord anymore because of these customs that I didn't. And so you get people who are kind of maybe curious about religion, but then they go and they see these things, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to them. So I think what you're doing is invaluable, because you are going, all right, they didn't actually mean don't put the pork next to this and that and the other. But back in in the 2000 BC or whenever this was going on, this was important because X, Y, and Z, and that context provides a lot of value.
That's exactly right.
Okay, yeah. So you talked about, I know you've got other interpreters that you use. Can you give us some other kind of expansion on some of those? Yeah.
So again, the higher and lower law would be the first one that I like to use, and again, that starts off right at Genesis 1:1. So that's the spiritual and the carnal, or the physical, that's always trying to be brought together. I mean, if I go to the heart of Christianity, for example, and the resurrection, or even it might be described as the Eucharist, or the sacrament that is used in most Christian churches, you've got a representation there of both, right? You've got the blood of Christ, which is really representative of the Spirit.
Sure.
It's and then you've got the bread or the wafer that is used for the physical for his body, right? And he, just like he says in the Last Supper. And so that is a principle that is carried through all of Scripture, and we can see that almost everywhere. A lot of people don't realize that, for example, Moses, when he went up to Sinai, he came back down first with a certain number of tablets, right? And he had a different law. And then he comes down and the golden calf is there and people making merry and partying and doing who knows what, right? And so he gets mad. He throws down the tablets and breaks them. And then he has to go back up Sinai and he comes back down with a different law, right? And so to me, as I look at that, I think you've got a higher law that was brought down first that they weren't ready for yet. And then he goes back up and has to come down with a lower law. And most of what I see, for example, in the Old and New Testament is built off of this friction, really, that ends up going between this higher and this lower law. And we have it today as well. I think I listen a lot to a lot of podcasts.
Sure.
And one guy I listen to is Sam Harris.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? So he's an atheist.
Right.
Kind of a product of the Enlightenment. He's very focused on Enlightenment values, which I feel I am too.
Right.
But he has a very different view of purpose and meaning and why we're here, etc. But he brings up something that's interesting that I would look at as a lower law view, right? He says, he asks about why are we looking at an existence of God, and he'll say that, I'm trying to think of exactly what he says. He says that we have to believe, if we believe in God, that we're in a laboratory that God has put together,
right,
and that we're down here and we're going to have to believe in some bad evidence, which is called faith. And I actually appreciate that he says evidence in that, because as you look at this higher and lower law, and if I were to look at faith, I think one of the biggest issues that someone would have with religion is understanding what that faith means. And at a higher law level, looking at that, it would mean, to me, it is not belief, right, that he's kind of putting out there. I think it's more what he probably subtly said, didn't mean to say, but that is that it is evidence. And if you run a word search, for example, in the Old Testament, and you look up faith, you'll find two instances of the word faith in the Old Testament. Whereas if you run it in the New Testament, it's, I can't remember, 200, 300, something like that, right? And if you switch that with trust, and you run trust in the Old Testament, it dominates over the amount of trust that's written in the New Testament. So the Hebrew from the Old Testament and the Greek from the New Testament, these words are mostly interchangeable. And the root, for example, of faith is fidere. It's the Latin fidere that was put into the Vulgate, that was translated by Jerome. It means trust. And so if you think of faith in the terms of trust and not belief, then I think you get a different idea of what faith actually means. I don't want to believe in something for the sake of believing in something. It's not enough for me. But if I can trust in something because I've had a 30-year marriage, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of work.
Sure. Yeah, and it's not common anymore.
And it's not easy.
No.
Right? Now, I love my wife to death. I'm very happy about our marriage. We've got 4 kids together. But after 30 years, there's a certain amount of trust that is built up. And that is the most real thing about that relationship, is that trust. It's very real. And that's where the word trust comes from. It's an old English word from trau, which means true. And if I can lean on certain principles in religion and they work, I can trust on them then after a while.
Sure.
Right? I can keep leaning on that and trying it, experiment with it just like I would with science. And I can experiment with those principles. And if they work, then I can lean on them. Now I've got faith. That's, to me, is what faith would be. But that's an approach that would be a higher law as compared to science, which would be a lower law, which I also believe in. But
right. So what's the counter to that argument, though? So when we're talking about Sam Harris and he's saying, okay, I want more evidence, he's saying, is the atheist position, because I don't, are they saying that you should have some sort of evidence that these laws or these principles work?
So I think that what he's asking for is physical evidence.
So evidence of a creator.
Yeah, let me see something. Show me a sign, right? It's let me see something now.
And so you idiots who are, religious, you're believing in something without any actual evidence. So you're saying it's not just about kind of blind belief in something. You're saying these principles have been sort of passed down through the generations, through our creator, and it's something that we've grown to trust. Therefore, we can kind of have that connection to faith.
Yeah, I would say it is evidence.
Okay.
That would be, I think a lot of religious people would not like me saying that, but sure. I would say it is evidence. And it is, it's just spiritual evidence. Am I on here?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just,
Can you hear yourself?
It's just spiritual evidence. And as compared to physical evidence.
Okay. Making a correction on the sound. All right.
Perfect. Yeah, so if I was looking at, Sam Harris might say, well, I'm going to look at this in a scientific view. And I would say, great, science is incredible. But he's looking at a carnal, physical observance. There's also a spiritual observance that you can have, which is experiential, right? Like in Spanish, they have two words for to know. One is saber, which is facts.
Yeah.
I know something. Or conocer, which is I'm familiar with it. If I've been somewhere, I know it, they would say. And so that's familiar with it. And that's what I'm talking about there is you still have a laboratory that you can work with spiritually where you would have evidence like you would have with science. The difference is it's evidence internally, right? I know this works. I know how I feel about it. I know the outcomes of things because I love my wife, I love my kids, right, and I sacrifice for them. Why would I keep doing that? Because I want the product that it produces.
Right. And what's the evidence of that, Greg? How do you, how can you prove that you love your wife? How can you prove that you love your kids? That's what I don't understand. There are certain things in the world that you just have a guttural feeling in your soul and in your heart as to the way things are. And I don't know how people who don't, or who atheists, how they actually rectify that. How do they describe that or explain that? It's kind of foreign to me that we're all just, I guess, organisms who aren't connected to anything, just kind of bumping around in the universe and bumping into one another, and we have these feelings as a result of chemical operations going on in our head and our bodies, and that's all there is to it. And if you think differently, you're under some sort of mass delusion.
Yeah, which also means that your outcome's determined already, right? In other words, if it's all biology,
right,
then whatever you're going to decide here in 5 minutes is already determined by the cells in your body and your brain,
right? And
which completely removes agency,
right?
Right. You have no choice as to what you're going to do, who you're going to be. I got a problem with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's heavy stuff. I love it. All right, so there are some other things that I wanted to make sure we touch on. We talked a little bit about your marriage, right? Your marriage is 30 years, and you've got 4 kids, and I know your wife, and she's absolutely in love with you in a way that
it's good to hear.
It's good to hear. Yeah, I know her, and she and when she talks about you, you can see that glisten in somebody's eyes. Like you can see it. You can actually see that there, which is an amazing thing. My parents are divorced. A lot of my friends' parents are divorced. Some of my friends are already married and divorced. It's just kind of something where I've got one of them who's twice divorced, right? 33 years old. Yeah. What are you doing? So
third time's a charm.
Third time, yeah, they'll get it right, apparently. But a couple things. What do you think the role of marriage? What is the role of marriage in today's world, and how are you able to maintain this marriage? You've got, as you said, it's a lot of work. 30 years, 4 kids. It's a lot of work. Can you give us your thoughts on both those?
That's really deep stuff.
That's deep stuff, man. That's why you're on the show.
Stuff, yeah.
That's why you're here.
And this is public, right? This is going up.
It's public. Okay. Yeah, it's going live.
Well, I would say that everything rests on it. And what I mean by that is individually, me as a person, I don't think I can be everything I need to be. And I don't think I can progress to where I want to progress to without being married. That doesn't mean for some people it has to happen now. I believe in an afterlife. I believe in marriage in an afterlife. So I think that everybody has that chance, but there's something about, and of course this is a big fight coming on our civilization now with gender, but there's something about being tied completely to someone that, number one, you love. And what I mean by love is not a feeling. I mean a verb, right? It's like this is action, this is sacrifice, this is I'm going to do what needs to be done. And having the ability to look outside of myself for what really has become the biggest part of me. And so that changes me, right? That changes me. That makes me more humble. That makes me more spiritual. That gives me better direction in life, to know that I'm fully responsible for my wife. Now, when I say that, I believe that she's also fully responsible for me, right? It's a two-way street. And so I think that then changes a family, right? And the way your kids are going to look at you and your spouse. And then I think it also changes civilization. So for me, everything is focused in on the family first. And then inside of that family, it is marriage, and making that work. Now, my parents were divorced when I was 6 years old. I was really young. My dad remarried. My mom didn't. But that is a big problem. But I think that, and it's not always in our world an easy thing to accomplish. We've got roles that are changing often right now. We've got a lot of distractions. We've got technology that all the way back through the last 100 years, from everything from washing machines and what can be done for the domestic chores to the pill, which changed everything. There's been some big changes there that kind of disrupt what marriage used to be. But I still think it's absolutely core to everything. And the commitment there is, can I get outside of myself? It's the same thing with believing in God.
Right.
It's, can I look outside of myself to something instead of just to myself? And that changes you.
Right. And that is a difficult thing to ask of people in today's society.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult for people to do that. You know, you used the word sacrifice. There's a part of you that you're sacrificing to be in this loving relationship with your wife. You're acknowledging there are things that I have to give up to make this work. You can't just go do whatever the hell you want to do.
Exactly.
You can't do it. You have to give up certain things, and there's a lot of people, and myself included, that I'm not married. You know, it's a little scary, right? To say I'm gonna go give up all these things.
Well, it's hugely scary, and the commitment level, right?
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
And then you've got a lot of kind of disposable culture that's burning up. You all the dating apps where everybody's swiping left, swiping right. Nah, don't like you. Go on a couple of dates, didn't like them, swipe. It's just it's disposable. Single use dates. You go to the next one. So it is an interesting thing. But I guess my question to you is, where I wanted to go with the sacrifice comment was, what happens when people are in a marriage, or they rush into a marriage that they don't want to be in anymore? How does faith deal with that? What's the recommendation on that? I know you're not a marriage counselor, but
no, I'm not a marriage counselor.
I know you're not, but you've been in a marriage for 30 years.
And I don't know what my wife would think about me giving advice on marriage, but yes, I would say, first question I would have is, do they have kids?
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that's lost today a little bit more, is like, look, I'm sorry, but your kids are more important.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that in some cases there's no way around it.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. But I think that if you, again, make a very large sacrifice if necessary for the benefit of your kid, at least while they're growing up, that's probably the number one rule to me that I would have.
Yeah.
Is I've got to make this work for my kids if at all possible. No kids there or no way around it. One way that faith, I think, changes that, number one, is if you're both have the same beliefs.
Sure.
If you're in the same religion together, that, number one, makes things a lot easier because it's kind of a third point that you can both go to, right, to look at for direction and for a goal that you both have.
Right.
So that helps. And I know that the numbers are much higher for people that are in the same religion, being married in the same religion, than they are as if it's split.
To stick together.
To stick together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I would say, again, I think the sacrifice, it's like someone told me once, nothing worthwhile is easy.
Sure.
And so the marriage side, it is not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but it's worthwhile.
Right.
And the bottom line is it's like your work, I mean, if your work isn't easy.
Right.
There's a lot of other things you might want to do.
It's true.
But what are you producing and what is coming out of that? Is it worthwhile to you? And is there something greater that you're getting back in return? And see, think of those that are able to stick out a marriage for a long period of time. They live a long life. They have kids together. They have grandkids from those kids. And they go into old life having this legacy and all of this that they have produced. That's gold to me.
Right.
I've seen it. I've seen it with my parents. I saw it with my grandparents, and it's, again, needing to know why on something like that, I think, is really important. But I think there's a pretty strong why there at the end of the road.
Yeah. And, it seems to me, this is something that's always kind of been instinctual to me that I grew up kind of in a broken home, right? I didn't, my parents were divorced, single mom, 3 boys, father was in and out of the picture, and it's a difficult thing. And then I would look at my friends and I would say, okay, well, they've got a kind of a strong nuclear family. Mm-hmm. And that to me just felt better growing up. But today it feels, and this was 33 years ago. Mm-hmm. Today it does seem like there's sort of a transition in our society that's not necessary anymore. You don't have to be in a nuclear family. You don't even have to be of the same, of opposite genders anymore, to raise a child. Mm-hmm. And, without debating the merits on that or whatever, I do feel like there is some importance to kind of preserving society's social fabric. And the institution of marriage is a big component of that.
I think that's right, and I think that when the rubber hits the road on things, life gets difficult, either internally with you personally, or with family, or with work, or in a civilization, things get really, really rough. We're incredibly privileged in the sense that we live in a modern world with a great economy, technology. We don't. In many ways, all technology does is reduce sacrifice,
right,
and work, right. It's like, what's more convenient? I want something. It's like my wife actually went last night, went to Redbox, and got a DVD, and we couldn't make it work.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, well, why would you get a DVD? That you got to take the time to put it in and take it out.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah. And it's like it's all about convenience.
Right.
But I don't know where I was going with that, but. I think that we're going to find with each successive generation that as that unit of marriage disintegrates, that there's going to be an unraveling of things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, there's with a lot of the social issues, with all issues actually, there's kind of always a pendulum that I think swings back both ways. You have the free sex stuff, you have no relationships, everybody's autonomous and independent on the one end of the pendulum, and then things kind of swing back the other way and back and forth. I'm not real sure where we're at right now.
I think we're swinging back because, I'm thinking of, as you say that, I think of the 60s.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I was around there.
The pill came around at first before that, and then it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Right.
My teachers were all from that era.
Right.
But now, and so what it was kind of an unraveling of rules, everything kind of fell apart. How did it fall apart? But I mean, the family has been hit by that.
Right.
And now it's kind of like you see like the Me Too movement and things like that come around. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Maybe we do need certain rules here because some things aren't working very well. And so it seems like that pendulum, as you say, it kind of swings into this area of everything's okay, tolerance of everything. And then it's like, well, wait a minute here. There's some problems that are coming up, and maybe we need to set some new rules in place.
Yeah, I do think it's a whole different topic. We can dive into it a little bit, but there's kind of a crisis of gender or traditional gender roles, the way that I see it. So men are not acting like the traditional man, and women are not acting like the traditional woman anymore. And it may feel sort of empowering in some ways for predominantly I see this with women. So just kind of anecdotally, I'm at the age now where a lot of the female friends that I have who are about my age, 30, early 30s, who have kind of lived this life of being the really independent, strong, feminist type who doesn't need a man for anything. I'm independent. I have my own career and I never need a guy and all this stuff. Well, now they're kind of at that point in their lives where I think they're having some regrets. I don't know that they would admit it, but you can see that there is some concern there that maybe had they done things a little bit differently, they would have found a suitable companion. And they're kind of coming to the realization that that the way that they've been living their lives is leading them to interact with a bunch of kind of subpar men. And then on the counterpart of that, you've got a lot of men who are scared to death of getting married. They don't want to get married. They don't want to have kids. They want to play their video games. They don't want to act like men anymore. They don't want to make any of those sacrifices that you talked about. And by the time you hit your early 30s, a lot of those men are already married, or there's kind of this natural divide that happens between the men who want to get into relationships, and once you hit 33, 34, and a guy's on his career path, he's having some success, he's becoming kind of more independent, he's going, maybe the relationship stuff isn't for me anymore. So you've got this big divide between the two genders. And I think, like you said, I think if this keeps going the way that it's going, I think there's going to be a very, very large segment of the population that is just entirely unhappy.
I think that's right. Now, I've never gone through that. I got married when I was 23.
Yeah.
So I've had a married life for 30 years here, longer than I haven't. But I think that I think there's two things there that you said. One is the men that women would want to marry. There's probably, honestly, a smaller group of men that women would want to marry than there are of women that men want to marry. And the reason I say that is because the expectations now from women of who they want to marry, they've come into a place where most of them are working full time. They may have careers. They usually don't want to look at somebody else who maybe makes less money than them.
Yeah.
That might be a feminist thing to do. Fine. But I think if you asked most women, I don't think that they would want someone necessarily that makes less than them. I think that if they had their druthers, they would pick somebody who made more than them, who's successful. They want that still, right? And so the older a woman gets, the fewer of those men are going to be available. Sure. Because those men probably want to get on with business and life. Right. And so they're taking care of things. So now you've got an ever decreasing pool here of men that those women would want to marry. And then with the women, of course, they've got a biological clock. There's just no way around that. Right. And so if you want a certain life with kids, there's a time frame here. There's a window that you have got to work within. Right. And that probably gets tougher and tougher to deal with, say, for example, the later into your 30s that you start to go for a woman. And
no question. And the clock is ticking, and they know it. And the problem is I think once that realization sets in, now they're looking for the first person who will marry them. Mm-hmm. And
I don't know that, but
I've had these conversations.
You're in that world.
I've had this conversation with a lot of women,
Yeah.
and they're just rushing to get married. And it's kind of like this weird self-delusion that's going on. They're telling, we're in love and all this stuff, and then I think that contributes to the divorce rate.
Sure,
because they're rushing into a marriage, and it's done for the wrong purposes. But maybe I'm just a sexist white male. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is the men don't have as much reason to get married.
Right.
I mean, in our culture compared to 50 years ago,
right.
I mean, sex is much more open, right?
Yeah.
It's not something like, okay, I need to get married because I'm going to go nuts if I don't. It's the exact opposite, really, right? And so it's like there's no real pressure of why do I want to take on this responsibility? Why do I want to make this commitment? I can wait a long time to do this. Men can have kids when they're very old.
Right. It's a complicated topic. Yeah. It's a complicated topic. Yeah. Well, I don't know what the prescription is for it. I think maybe as the pendulum swings back, I am hopeful that people will maybe have less, at least in popular culture, have less animus towards the traditional roles of men and women. I don't think it's a bad thing for men to want to open the door or to give up, their seat or be a gentleman, and actually invest time in caring for a woman and vice versa. It's something that is I think kind of a lost art these days. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
All right, a couple other things. We got. I know how much. All right, 45 minutes. All right, so at the beginning of the program, you talked a little bit about your journey into starting Cwic. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this was born out of some health issues, right? Can you share a little bit about that story? So,
I can share a little bit about it.
All right.
So I've always been unhealthy.
Okay.
A lot of issues with health that I've had to deal with, mostly autoimmune type of issues.
Yeah.
I've had a few breaks here and there from it, but a lot of stuff that I've had to deal with kind of on my own and without doctors. And that has resulted in some actual very difficult things, very dangerous health issues. For example, my heart. So a few years ago, actually just yesterday, 3 years ago yesterday, I went in for open heart surgery.
Okay.
And some of that is genetic. I had a triple bypass, but some of it is not. And I am certain, based on things I have researched since then, that I think I could have avoided that and many other health issues that I've had throughout my life, these autoimmune issues that I have.
With the change in diet?
With the change in diet, number one, which is basically primarily little to no sugar or bread.
Okay.
And number two is through fasting. And so there's a higher lower law issue there with fasting. It's like, okay, that's something that most religions prescribe, right? In part of their behavior and in their principles is there's a principle of fasting. Well, it turns out there's something to it, right? There's something physical to it that is not only, okay, I'm able to sacrifice a little bit here. I can kind of, one thing I think you learn from fasting is taking control of, call it passions or needs that you have physically. But there's a spiritual element to it also. And, but between autophagy and your gut, anybody that researches into fasting right now is going to discover a whole new world, medical world, of benefits that you receive that seem to be an evolutionary type of a mechanism that we all have, that we're used to, going through periods of drought and famine and et cetera, that really helps your body fight against disease and makes you feel, for me, it can be night and day. I started about a year ago. Now, Mormons fast regularly anyway, but I started going about a year ago onto longer fasts. And so I started.
How long are we talking here?
Well, I started with a 1 day a month and then quickly went to 2 days.
So 1 day, a full 24 hours.
24 hours.
Just water.
No water.
No water.
No water.
Nothing.
Yeah, so nothing. Yeah. So that's a typical Mormon fast. Would be once a month, nothing.
Okay.
Okay. And
that is that something that's pretty regular?
I didn't do it regularly.
Okay.
Most I would say a lot of Mormons just kind of like they wake up Sunday morning and they don't have breakfast, and that's
their fast.
That's their fast. A lot of
That's difficult to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So so I started doing the full 24 without the water, and then I went to 48, but drinking water the second 24 hours.
Okay.
Right. So I still only stuck to 24 hours without water. I did on my mission once in Mexico City go 48 hours, working my butt off all day for 2 days without food or water.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. But then I went to 3 days the next month.
Yeah.
Well, just the 24 hours without water, but the other 48 with water. And then I went to 4 days the next month. And so I've gone to 5 days. Now I've done 5 days twice without any food, just water, and that's it. And here's the crazy thing, is that you think that you're going into starvation mode, or how could you possibly do that? I feel great when I do it.
Yeah.
And now at first you don't, because your body's so used to having those carbs especially, and you've got to have that energy, and you get headaches and things like that. But if you move yourself slowly into it, I don't stop a fast because I'm hungry either. Right? I just stop it because of my heart. And I think, okay, there's only so far I probably should push myself on this. But that, more than anything else, for me, has been the biggest change in improvement in health, is going through those extended fasts.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a lot. And you're not taking any supplements. You're not.
No.
It's just nada.
Nada. And the thing they found is that if you're eating a lot of grain and carbs, it's like for people that get scurvy, for example.
Yeah.
Right on, in the old days when you'd go on a ship and you had no vitamin C, you don't need it if you're not eating all the carbs. That's what causes the scurvy. And so if you're eating grain, which is the cheap way to eat, right?
Right.
You'd eat on a ship if you're traveling for 3 months or something out on the ocean. You're going to get scurvy if you're eating grain and you don't have any vitamin C. But otherwise, you don't have, your body produces what it needs and keeps the balances in place because we've evolved to that. And so I'm not going to recommend anybody do that without talking to a doctor.
Yeah,
got to throw that disclaimer in there. But for me, it's been huge deal.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, I did think back to it. I mean, I used to wrestle, and in wrestling, you have to cut weight, which means you are not eating. I mean, you're getting a very limited amount of water as well. Mm-hmm. You have to make weight. So if I was weighing, 190 pounds, 189 pounds, and I needed to wrestle at 163 pounds, I'm losing basically 15 pounds of weight. Just to make it under.
Did you ever wrap yourself in saran wrap or anything?
I did it all.
You did all that?
I did it all. They actually got advanced. So instead of wrapping yourself in anything or using garbage bags, they actually have sweatsuits. So they're plastic suits that have, like a tension around the limbs. So you put it on your arms and on your feet, and you're covered in this big plastic suit. Then you would throw on your sweaters and your hoodies and all that stuff over that, and you would I would literally go into a sauna and jump rope and do jumping jacks in a sauna in that outfit. I'd lose 6 or 7 pounds in an hour and a half. It's crazy. But then you would, that's only the water weight. Then you really wouldn't be eating almost anything for probably 2 days before a wrestling match, and then you weigh in that morning, and then you just flood yourself with everything, but not really. I mean, because you get sick, your stomach, everything had shrunken up, so you kind of slowly sip the water until you put on 6 or 7 pounds back in the water. But I never felt real terrible, during that time. It's probably terrible for my kidneys and things, but when you're 16, 17, 18,
I don't know. Honestly, I'm not sure about that. I would say after the first day and a half, for me now, it's probably the first 10 hours. But starting off the first day and a half, I felt great after that. After the first day and a half, it was I'm thinking clearer. One of the issues that I have is I have this constant pounding throughout my body that I feel real strong. That goes away. And I have more energy. It's the exact opposite of what you would think, but your body compensates and it kind of clears things out that you don't need and probably shouldn't have.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, if there is a history of humanity, prior to any of our recorded history or any of those things, as we evolved or however we got here, there's undoubtedly periods where you've gone through a long period of time not eating, not drinking, and so your body develops some mechanisms to deal with that. So it makes sense for me. All right, one other thing. So on LDS. This is something that I am interested in. I know you're very involved in the church, and your podcast is it's Christianity based.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something that people who are not LDS can listen to?
Sure.
And why is that? I guess, how about this? What is, in a high level overview, what is the difference between LDS or standard Christianity or Catholicism, or I know it's probably you could teach a college course on that.
Sure.
But just give me some general framework here, so that if people who are listening who are not LDS, can they get value out of your program?
Yeah. First of all, on the program itself, it's for example, right now, again, I'm doing 2 episodes a week on the New Testament. There might be here and there something that is more specifically an LDS reference.
Okay.
But for the most part, I think that most everybody it's more of an explanation of what's being said, what the environment is, what the teachings are that are coming out of there. I think that anybody who is Christian or not, and I have some followers that are not Christian, and a lot of what I would call creedal Christians that do listen to the podcast and that really enjoy it. Again, it's very different and unique on the takes that I have. I think the biggest difference between the LDS faith and what I would call creedal Christianity is exactly that word, creedal. In other words, it's the creeds that came, like the Nicene Creed and others that came around mostly in the 3rd and 4th centuries, kind of codified a doctrine, right, that eventually became what they called universal, and that's where you get the name Catholic from. It means universal. And what Mormons believe is that going back to the time of Christ and his apostles, that is, they were killed off, and you have Paul writing all these letters trying to hold everything together, and you've got, they're kind of already going off into this apostasy or into the wrong doctrines in these different areas that he's writing to, the Corinthians and the Ephesians, etc. Our belief is that things did fall apart, and that there used to be a priesthood that was with the apostles that kind of went away, and that was all centered in the temple. And so for both the Jews and for Christians, when that temple was annihilated by the Romans in AD 70, well, the Christians lost where they had their center of influence and their center of theology, their sacrifices, and the priesthood. You don't go around and see much priesthood anymore with the Jews. It's the rabbis, right, the teachers. And it's not, they call where they worship a temple, they go to temple, but it's really a synagogue. And so we have a temple, right, that is not where we meet regularly, but we go there for specific ordinances, and for mostly it's part of what we call sealing, which is to bring families together. So the whole thing is about families. And that our priesthood that we have, that we claim, is focused on the temple. It's centered in the temple. And so our belief is that Jesus, after he was resurrected, and the apostles, after he was resurrected, they spent most of their time in the temple, and they taught in the temple, and they had temple ordinances that they followed. And most of Christianity would say, well, there was a replacement of the temple with the body of Jesus Christ, and the body of Christ is kind of the church, right? And that's kind of the replacement of the temple. We don't believe that. So we believe that it is absolutely necessary to have this temple where these priesthood ordinances happen, and where the authority kind of comes out of, and then we have a prophet and apostles, just like Peter may have been a prophet and the apostles were there. So, we believe that there was a specific organization of the church with a specific authority that fell apart. Much of the teachings carried on, and then at the time of Joseph Smith, early 1800s, that was restored. All of that was brought back. So it's more of a restoration kind of a theology, and that would be, I would say, as far as theologically, that's the major difference that Mormons have from everyone else.
Yeah, it doesn't sound all that different. I mean, it's just kind of an interpretive difference between the two, or I'm sure there's some bigger lines there. I guess why there's kind of a big divide between Mormonism and some of the other religions. Mm-hmm. I don't know if if you're aware of that
Very aware,
division.
yes.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, and it's not something that I know a whole lot about, but I know that there is a division. The closest thing that I can kind of relate it back to is when Mitt Romney was running for president. Mm-hmm. There was a big backlash to that, and probably a big part of the reason why he's not president, in my opinion, is because a lot of this, the kind of the, what did you call them?
Creedal Christians.
Creedal Christians. There was a big, I think, kind of pushback to that. I thought he was highly qualified, very charismatic guy, good-looking guy, nice family, a lot of accomplishments, and he's running for office. But you have a lot of the Catholics, you have a lot of, the Baptist, everybody who was really concerned about, quote, putting a Mormon into office. Why do you think that is? I have my own suspicions, but why do you think that there's such, and maybe my premise is wrong, but if there's not a whole lot of daylight in between the belief systems, right? Between some of the basic principles, I think, are in alignment between the Catholics, the Christians, the Jews, even the Mormon faith. If there's not a lot of daylight between them, why do you think that there's such kind of a vitriolic split between them when these issues come up?
Well, there used to be a really vitriolic split between the Catholics and the Protestants.
Sure.
Back in the day, and several hundred years ago, and maybe it's a little something like that. I think that number one, you have a religion that is very new, relatively, and so there are not hundreds or thousands of years of legacy here that you're looking at. And so anything that's new is always going to be looked at with some suspicion.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the first things a member of the LDS Church would think that they feel from someone in a circumstance that you're talking about is suspicion. It's like, well, what do they believe? What do they really do in those temples?
Right.
What is this all about? Is this a cultish type thing?
Cult is the word, yeah. And it's kind of insulting, but it is. But it is thrown around a lot.
Sure. And it's like, well, I think that part of that is because it's new. I think that part of it is because, like Catholicism, where you had JFK, it's like, okay, he was elected president, he's first Catholic, because there was some suspicion there because you have a mostly Protestant nation, and the Catholics are hierarchical, right? You've got a structure for the church, and it all goes up to the Pope. Right? And we're the same way. So it's not like open for everything else. It's like we have a hierarchical structure also that goes up to the president of the church. And I think that's part of it. I think that's an issue. It's kind of like it's kind of our way or the highway for us, right?
Right.
And so I think that's another issue. And then I do think the temple has something to do with it. I think that people wonder about that, and why. It's just a lot of it is unfamiliarity. If you go outside of the West in the United States and you go to the South or the Northeast, a lot of those people, they've never even met a Mormon, right? And so it's like they're completely unfamiliar with it. They don't know the behavior or the family-centeredness of the religion or anything like that.
Right.
And so I think it's pretty natural that there would be suspicion. Honestly, I think I think I would be that way.
Yeah.
I think I would be suspicious of something like that if I didn't know anything about it. So I think a lot of it is education. I think a lot of it is familiarity and newness.
Yeah.
There's a lot to do with it.
Well, and the community is very tight-knit.
It is.
The LDS community is very, very tight-knit, which is, I think, a great quality of it. I mean, you care for your own in a lot of ways. And I think that when other people or other segments of society feel like they're not a part of that, it's cliquey, it's like in high school. The jocks are over there with the jocks, right. The goth kids are over there with the goth kids. And so people can sort of, build those walls even if they don't need to be there. And
I think that happens even more so maybe in the Mountain West here, Arizona, Utah, Idaho. I grew up in Orange County, California, and it wasn't that way.
Really?
Because there were very few of us.
Okay.
And so it was like we were close and we were kind of tight-knit, but
yeah,
my best friends were not LDS. I didn't grow up with my best friends being LDS and until much later in my childhood. And so I think it's very different in most of the world outside of again, you had a religion that was persecuted,
right?
Deeply persecuted,
right,
in certain parts of the country, and that basically got kicked out in the middle of winter and had to travel to Utah, right? And so they were exclusionary, and in some ways it was a survival mechanism.
Sure.
And you had their farms razed and burned and murder and rape. I mean, everything was going on.
Right.
And so they were very defensive, and they kind of maybe became a little insular in that sense. And they're out in their own little civilization here trying to build Zion, out on their own. And everything kind of sprouts from there. But as the church has grown and communication has come about, I think that people become more familiar with things. And it's like, okay, it's just Greg.
Right.
He's
a nice guy.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. So there's a history there.
There is history there, and it is interesting. I'm a political science major before I went to law school, and we studied a lot of American history and history through all over the world. But when you're studying American history, the Mormon story, in my experience, was basically left out. It was kind of a little blip until I took a specific class on American history in the Southwest, and then we kind of learned about the Exodus and the from I think Nauvoo over to Utah and all that stuff, and it's kind of a shame because it is a pretty amazing story on what happened there and the perseverance and all the hardship that went on there. And so when I look, when Romney was running and there was that kind of pushback, I would say the Mormon people, it's one of the most impressive stories in American history. I mean, what these people went through and what they persevered and overcame, and they're extremely successful, extremely loyal. They've got amazing families. They've got great businesses. So maybe you shouldn't be so fearful that these people are going to come in and convert the entire nation or something like that.
Right,
like there's no,
some theocracy.
Some kind of underlying ulterior motive going on here. It's just a different set of good people there. So just relax over the whole thing. But it is interesting because it is prevalent. A lot of people are skeptical about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Republicans are skeptical of Democrats.
That's true.
And Democrats are skeptical of Republicans, and it's like, is Trump going to try and stay in for 20 years? And, I remember people saying the same thing about Obama from the other side, and it's just kind of like, when you're, again, if you're outside of that, you're looking outside or, looking in from the outside, suspicions are easy to have.
Well, you always got to find somebody to point your finger at.
Sure. It makes it easier.
It always got to do it. Well, all right. So where can people find more from you? So if they want to subscribe to your podcast or to your YouTube channel, what are the best places for people to go?
So on podcast, I'm available on all of the mediums, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, SoundCloud, you name it. On YouTube, I've got a channel there under Cwic Media. Again, that's CWIC Media. And I think we're up to about 70 episodes on there right now. And then you can go to cwicmedia.com. We've got all of our episodes there, as well as some additional information about the system that I kind of looked at the scriptures through.
Outstanding. And you're also getting a little bit more active on Facebook.
Yes, starting that out. Yes.
So let's plug that.
So.
Yeah, you talk to me. Facebook.com/Cwic Media, CWIC Media. Greg, thanks so much for coming on today. I really appreciate talking to you.
Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Until next time.